I think a man is a person who achieves his goal and make all his dreams come true for himself and for the people.
I was never suicidal. I love life too much to ever be suicidal.
That was Michael Jackson, a man who loved life to the fullest, an artist yearning to realize every dream for himself and for humanity. He never wanted to die, and to preserve that precious life, he spared no expense, entrusting it to one man, $150,000 a month. That was the price Michael Jackson paid a cardiologist to keep him alive. But at 11:51 a.m. on June 25, 2009, when the king of pop's heart stopped beating at a rented villa in Holmby Hills, Dr. Conrad Murray was busy with other matters. Instead of calling 911, he called his girlfriend. Instead of resuscitation, he stuffed vials of medication into a plastic bag and removed the IV drip from its stand. And while every second mattered, precious time slipped away before a security guard finally made the emergency call at 12:21 p.m. One question has haunted the world for 17 years. Why was a $1 million life exchanged for such crude acts of self-preservation? The smoldering wound. The night of June 25th was merely the culmination of a long chain of events. To clearly see the full picture, our journey must begin 25 years prior. In 1984, Michael Jackson was filming a Pepsi commercial at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. On the sixth take, a pyrotechnic device misfired. His hair and scalp caught fire on stage, third-degree burns, multiple surgeries, months of pain. That was the first time Michael ever touched an opioid painkiller. At the time, no one on his medical team imagined that a soft drink commercial would one day lead to a bedroom in Holmby Hills. In 1993, a second door opened. Michael faced his first child molestation allegation. The case was settled out of court for roughly $23 million. But from that moment on, the public saw him differently. Karen Fay, the makeup artist who worked beside him for nearly 3 decades, later testified in court. Michael had to go on stage every night, knowing that the whole world thought he was a pedophile. That was when his serious dependence on prescription drugs began. Not for the back pain from his 1999 fall in Munich, for sleep, to stop thinking. 2005 was the third door, and the biggest one. A 5-month trial. Michael was acquitted on every count, but what was left behind was a hollowed-out man. He sold Neverland. He left the United States. He lived in exile, first in Bahrain, then in Ireland. Karen Fay remembered that period in one breath. He couldn't eat. He was afraid. He got thinner. His back pain came back. Everything hit him at once. Every time the world came after him, Michael leaned harder on the medication. By the end of the decade, the pills weren't a treatment anymore. They were the only way he knew how to stay alive. By 2009, the slow-burning fuse was almost out. All it needed now was a spark. That spark had a name. This is it. The 50-show trap. On March 5, 2009, Michael Jackson stood on the stage at London's O2 Arena in front of 20,000 fans. He announced his comeback tour, This Is It, 10 shows. He promised he'd see them in July. The tickets sold out in hours, and that's when everything shifted. AEG Live, the company promoting the tour, decided to push the number of shows from 10 to 50. The decision was made without any real conversation with Michael. The contracts were signed. The stage was being built. The 50 shows had already gone on sale. By June, AEG had spent roughly $25 million on pre-production. Michael was deep in debt and facing bankruptcy. On paper, he had willingly signed the deal. In reality, there was no way out. Karen Fay noticed something change in him from the very first rehearsals. One question kept coming back in their conversations. Why can't I choose? Why can't I choose? He said it the way a child says it the moment he realizes he no longer has any say over his own life. One morning, Michael locked himself in the bathroom of his rented house and refused to come out for rehearsal. Paul Gongaware, AEG's co-CEO, called Michael's security guard. His tone, as Karen Fay described it in court, was angry and desperate. The order was short. Do whatever it takes. Do whatever it takes to get him to the rehearsal. Around the same time, Karen Fay received instructions of her own from Randy Phillips, AEG's CEO. She was to apply tough love. In practice, that meant ignoring whatever Michael asked for. On one occasion, she was told to push him onto the stage and put his earpiece in for him even when he didn't want it. Karen later summed up the relationship between AEG and Michael in a single line on Twitter. AEG owned Michael. This was no longer a tour. It was a contract that had been signed by a man who no longer had control over his own body. And that body, by June of 2009, was starting to give out. I could see his heartbeat through the skin. In early June, Michael started missing rehearsals. When he showed up, he forgot lyrics he'd been singing for decades. For the first time in his career, he asked for a teleprompter. On June 19th, he made it to the Staples Center but couldn't rehearse. He was shaking, so cold that Karen Fay covered him with blankets and put a space heater next to him. Kenny Ortega, the show's director, fed him chicken soup himself, rubbed his feet, and sent him home early. Ortega later testified that Michael looked lost, cold, and afraid that night. Around that same time, Michael Bush, the costume designer who'd been with Michael for almost 25 years, went into the dressing room for a fitting. When he came out, all the color had drained from his face. Karen Fay met him at the door. What Bush said next was something Karen later repeated through tears on the witness stand. "Oh my God, Turkle." I could see Michael's heartbeat through the skin in his chest. Turkle was the nickname Michael had given Karen. Travis Payne, the tour's choreographer, was noticing other things. Michael had started talking to himself, repeating the same sentences over and over. During one rehearsal, Michael said something to Kenny Ortega that ran cold through the whole crew. "God keeps talking to me." Karen Fay became someone Michael needed to see at all times during rehearsals. He'd call her out onto the stage and tell her, "Make sure I'm able to see you on the stage at all times." A few minutes later, he'd come back and tell her the same thing again. Karen went to Randy Phillips and tried to sound the alarm. She told him plainly that Michael could die if they kept pushing. Phillips answered in 3 words. "Yeah, this is bad." Then he did nothing. A fan also met Michael during that stretch and wrote Karen an email afterward. That email was projected on a courtroom screen in 2013, describing the moment Michael took off his jacket. "A skeleton. I saw his back. It was only bones. I am still in shock. If we do nothing, he will die." If a fan could see it in one short meeting, the question becomes why the people who'd signed contracts with Michael didn't see it. Or, more accurately, why they saw it and kept going. A tool of the system. Conrad Murray first met Michael Jackson in 2006 in Las Vegas, when he treated one of Michael's children. Murray was a cardiologist. He was about $1 million in debt and struggling to keep his clinic open. In May 2009, AEG signed a deal to bring Murray to London with Michael as his personal physician for the tour. $150,000 a month. But the number wasn't the most important part. The most important part was who the check came from. The money came from AEG, not from Michael. An internal AEG email, later surfaced during the 2013 wrongful death trial, made the dynamic plain. The line read, "Remind Murray that AEG, not MJ, is paying his salary." Murray understood the message. Stripped down, it meant one thing. If Michael couldn't get on that stage, Murray's contract was over. While Murray was moving toward the center of Michael's life, Kenny Ortega was getting frightened enough to send a string of emails to AEG executives. In one email to Randy Phillips on June 19th, Ortega described Michael as showing signs of paranoia, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder-like behavior. He recommended bringing in a psychiatrist to evaluate Michael. The email was read, the email was saved, and no one at AEG acted on it. On June 20th, An emergency meeting was held at Michael's house. Ortega, Randy Phillips, and Conrad Murray were all there. Ortega laid out what he had been watching unfold. Murray pushed back hard. He declared that Michael was physically and emotionally capable of handling all his responsibilities as a performer, and that he, Murray, was the only person qualified to make that call. After that meeting, Ortega's role in looking after Michael's health was scaled back. The last worried voice in the room had been pushed out. Conrad Murray was now the only person deciding whether Michael Jackson got to rest, what drugs went into his veins, and how weak he was allowed to get. A cardiologist, $1 million in debt, paid by the promoter, had just become the gatekeeper between Michael and anyone left in the world trying to save him. The last light before it went out. On June 21st and 22nd, Michael barely rehearsed. The crew was worried. Quiet conversations were happening among the tour team about whether the shows could be postponed. None of them had the authority to make that call. Then, on June 23rd, something unexpected happened. Michael walked into rehearsal with a completely different energy. Focused, singing well, hitting choreography that should have been beyond his body that week. Kenny Ortega later testified that he almost cried with relief. I was overjoyed at his energy, his state of mind, his enthusiasm. On June 24th, the final rehearsal at the Staples Center. Michael sang Earth Song under a gold spotlight. He turned in place, smiled at the crew. There are short clips from that night that have circulated online ever since. That was the last time the world saw Michael Jackson alive and performing. The crew went home on the night of June 24th, feeling like maybe this tour was actually going to work. Karen Faye would later sum up that mood in one sentence. I really believed he was going to make it. She was wrong. A body so thin its heartbeat was visible through the skin doesn't just bounce back in 2 days. Looking back from 2026, that sudden surge of energy wasn't a sign of recovery. It was the sign of a man being given more medication, not less. A strong enough dose of propofol, a precise enough schedule, and Michael could shine for a few hours before the body came to collect. But on the night of June 24th, no one in that building knew it yet. Everyone drove home relieved. Michael arrived back at 100 North Carrollwood Drive around 1 a.m. on June 25th. Conrad Murray was already there, waiting for him. The night it ended 1:30 a.m. Michael went to bed. The lights were turned off. According to Murray's later testimony, revealed in investigation documents, Michael couldn't sleep. This was not new. Michael had suffered from chronic insomnia for many years, once telling a close friend, I'd pay $1 million for a good night's sleep. Murray began administering medication at 1:30 a.m. First, 10 milligrams of Valium in pill form, then intravenous lorazepam, followed by midazolam, one type after another, for 7 hours. Each time Murray gave medication, Michael would lie waiting for sleep to come. Sleep never came. Around midnight, Michael began begging Murray for something else. He called it milk. That was the nickname Michael gave to propofol, due to its milky white appearance when injected. Propofol is a general anesthetic, used in surgical procedures, not a sleep aid. When propofol is administered, patients need continuous monitoring with an oxygen saturation monitor, a heart rate monitor, and readily available oxygen equipment. Murray had none of these devices or supporting nurses in Michael's bedroom. 10:40 a.m., Murray relented, injecting 25 milligrams of propofol mixed with lidocaine into the IV line. Michael finally slept. Before leaving Michael alone, Murray had fitted him with a device called a condom catheter, an external urinary catheter that allows a patient to urinate without waking up. This detail, revealed by bodyguard Alberto Alvarez in his 2011 court testimony, clarified Murray's intent. He was not preparing for a short nap, but for a prolonged sleep lasting many hours. Murray later claimed he left the bedside for about 2 minutes to go to the bathroom. However, phone records presented at trial showed Murray made and received multiple calls between 11:07 a.m. and 11:51 a.m., including a call with his girlfriend, Sade Anding. 11:51 a.m. Murray returned to the bedside. Michael was not breathing. This was the moment 911 should have been called immediately. But Murray did not. Instead, he called Michael Amir Williams, Michael's personal assistant, leaving a voicemail, and then the bodyguard. Next, Murray began attempting cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, on Michael, but with an improper technique. He compressed Michael's chest on the soft bed mattress, with one hand supporting his back and the other pressing down. According to doctors who testified at the trial, proper CPR must be performed on a hard surface like the floor, using both hands pressing straight down. Murray, a cardiologist, knew this well. Bodyguard Alberto Alvarez was the first to rush into the room. Upon entering, he saw Michael's eyes open, his mouth slightly agape, and was particularly shocked to see Michael wearing the condom catheter, a medical device for bedridden patients, not someone simply sleeping for a few hours. The first thing Murray asked Alvarez to do was not to call emergency services. Murray reached for a bedside cabinet, took out vials of medication, handed them to Alvarez, and said, "Here, put these in a bag." He also personally removed the IV drip containing propofol from its stand. Only after the medication vials had been hidden in a bag and the IV drip removed did Murray instruct Alvarez to call 911. 12:21 p.m. Alvarez dialed 911. The call lasted 46 seconds. When the emergency operator asked about the patient's condition, Alvarez replied, "He's doing chest compressions, but the patient is not responding at all." 12:26 p.m., Fire Station 71 paramedics arrived. They found Michael Jackson without a pulse and not breathing. Murray testified that he discovered Michael had stopped breathing at 11:51 a.m., 30 minutes before the 911 call. However, prosecutors at the 2011 trial argued that based on Murray's phone records, the actual time was much earlier, possibly up to 82 minutes before the 911 call. Regardless of whether the exact number was 30 or 82 minutes, the conclusion remained unchanged. A doctor observed his patient cease breathing and failed to call emergency services for a period far long enough for things to become too late. Later that same day, at 2:26 p.m., Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at UCLA Ronald Reagan Medical Center. On November 7, 2011, after a 7-week trial, a jury found Conrad Murray guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The sentence was 4 years. He served 2 and was released early in 2013 for good behavior. After his release, Murray's medical license was revoked in several states. He returned to his native Trinidad and Tobago. In interviews since, he has continued to insist he is innocent and to suggest that Michael caused his own death. But if you only look at Conrad Murray, you miss most of the story. Murray was the last man in a very long line. The Pepsi accident in 1984 put the first opioid into Michael's body. The 1993 allegations and the 2005 trial drained what was left of his spirit. AEG Live, in 2009, pushed a body that had already collapsed onto a stage for 50 shows, because $25 million in pre-production costs was too much to walk away from. And Conrad Murray was the last man placed at the end of that chain to keep the machine running. In 2013, Michael's family sued AEG Live for negligent hiring and supervision of Murray. After a 4-month trial, the jury cleared AEG of legal responsibility. The moral question, however, was never something a courtroom could answer. Michael Jackson spent his life giving the world music, movement, joy. The world gave back the spotlight that burned him alive. Expectations with no ceiling? A line of people making money off a body that had nothing left to give. And the question still sits there, 17 years after his death. In 2026, how many other stars right now are walking the same road? How many Whitney Houstons? How many Amy Winehouses? How many names that haven't been written yet? How many people are being paid right now to keep someone functional until opening night? The story of Michael Jackson didn't really end in that house in Holmby Hills. That's the reason the world is still talking about him. Because the real question was never why Michael Jackson couldn't be saved. The real question is whether anyone in that room that night actually wanted to save him.